Welcome to the MarTech Matrix, the podcast that cogently uncovers the business problems each tech company was built to solve. Today, Sean speaks with Brian Anderson, the Chief Executive Officer at Nacell, a next-generation e-commerce platform designed with composable infrastructures in mind. They work with brands like FTD, Ilia Beauty, and Bowl and Branch. They will be discussing the future of e-commerce and the benefits of a headless platform. After the show, head on over to themartechmatrix.com for show notes, contact information, and details on upcoming episodes. Now, get ready to enter the Matrix.
Brian, welcome into the Matrix. How are you today?
Doing well, Sean. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to this conversation because honestly, this is a topic that I've been trying to teach myself, and it's hard to understand, at least for me, maybe not for everybody. So I'm looking forward to having you educate us and the listeners on the topic. But to set the table for the conversation, can you define the terms headless commerce, composable infrastructure, and composable data orchestration in a non-technical way, and why these things are important to somebody working in e-commerce?
Yeah, I think before I define it, let's actually talk about maybe why these things are important, because I think that's been really a point of controversy. So, look, I think there's a certain point in a digital brand sort of life cycle where they hit product market fit, and then they realize that a lot of the work that they're doing is about optimization. So how do we improve? Really, generally, it boils down to 3 or 4 KPIs. Conversion rate is a hot topic. Average order value is a hot topic. Bounce rate and customer lifetime value. And so at some point, if the company, especially if the company grew up digitally native, they kind of shift from, oh, wow, yeah, we have product market fit. How are we going to grow this into a big business? And for the digitally native brand, it's at that point where these KPIs really start to come into play, and those things are to be maximized to do well. I think for a brick and mortar brand that is getting more into the digital realm, this happens pretty quickly. And if there's not a focus on these KPIs, then it is kind of questionable, right? So I think just given the knowledge base of your listeners, I'm sure they can relate with those 4 KPIs. And so just to set the stage here, that is really what these terms, headless, composable, what it all boils down to at the end of the day is how are you able to portray your brand well to your customers, and in a way that leverages technology to maximize those 4 core KPIs. And we could break each one down differently and whatnot, but that's the crux of the problem. So why did new technology have to come into the mix in order to do this well? And I'm very intrigued by a study that Microsoft has been running since 2000. In the year 2000, they determined that the US consumers' average attention span is a little over 12 seconds. In 2015, they sort of updated the data, and they realized that it fell quite significantly. So it fell to around 8.5 seconds for attention span. A new study that was released by them now showed that Gen Z's average attention span is just shy of 8 seconds. Okay, so there is just this plummeting of attention span that's happening, and it makes the digital marketer's job so much more difficult, because now not only do they have to portray their brand and get the right products in front of the customers and get the voice and everything right, but they have to do all of that within 8 seconds. And if it takes more legacy technology stack 5 seconds to load the website, you have to condense all of that into 3 seconds. It's just this impossible task, right? So what happened is new technology needed to come to the surface in order to solve that problem. And the way I like to describe this is, we have goldfish brain syndrome in the United States. And what that means is, a goldfish's attention span is somewhere between 9 seconds to 9.4 seconds. And, digital marketers today are marketing to a consumer that has about 8 seconds of attention span. And so that was really the impetus for why these technologies came to fruition. And, unfortunately, I think it's something that engineers innately understand. There have been massive studies that have been done by, folks at Walmart, at Amazon, and at Google that for, about a decade now have proven that there's an inverse correlation between things like page load speed and conversion rate, page load speed and bounce rate, meaning, the faster things load, the better those numbers are for the company. And I think engineers, they're always trying to make their thing better. And one of the things that makes their thing better is when things go faster, right? So I think it's very intuitive for engineers to understand why this is adding value. And I think the unfortunate state, of the headless and composable world right now is uh, really we haven't done a good job bridging the gap from the engineer who accepts and appreciates why this is valuable to the marketer. But it turns out that the marketer and the digital teams, they should care, I don't know, maybe an order of magnitude more than the engineers around these subjects, because it's making their job a lot more practical in terms of delivering the brand and storytelling to the consumer effectively in the digital realm. So that's why these things are important. Um, in terms of headless, the classic definition is, oh, it's a separation between the front end and the back end. And, I think 50% of the people I talk to is like, well, what does front end and back end mean? So just consider it, a good way of thinking about it is it's allowing you to use new modern technology that was built, within the last 5 to 6 years, to get your brand positioned as best as you possibly can to your consumers, right? So if you could imagine, if you're using technology where the consumer's attention span was 12 seconds, then that is at a great mismatch, right? You're at a great disadvantage if you're now using that technology to market to people that only have an 8-second attention span. So what Headless does is it allows you to bring in that modern technology that is more built for the world of the 8-second attention span.
Got it. Okay. So I want to come back to the definitions because they're big words and we try to avoid jargon. The composable data orchestration one is a big one. But one of the things that crossed my mind when you were explaining that was, in theory, conversion rate on a e-commerce website is not as strong as they might want it, or it might be declining. And you have these e-commerce teams looking at solutions that maybe personalize the experience, or they're testing different call to actions, or you can test anything, right? You can test the letters, the colors, whatever. Are they chasing the wrong thing? In other words, they've done all this work and now they're trying to improve upon the work they've done, but is the next solution really to talk to their engineering teams about, hey, should be on Headless because we can't get any more out of our own CRO efforts?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So first of all, we have a lot of folks on our team that have spent a lot of time at Optimizely, and the idea that you could like change a color or like a button and call that a successful A/B test it's a bit of an eye roll. Like it does take more than that. I also think that the first fundamental thing that has to be right is the product that you're selling has to have product market fit, and it has to be a good product, right? So you can't use technology to replace a bad product. It's not going to happen. That's why I always say you really shouldn't be involved with these sorts of projects until you do have product market fit. So as long as those things are fundamentally true, then the next issue starts to rear its ugly head, which is if you have product market fit, except for very exceptional outlier cases, you also have a lot of competition. And so it's not always that, oh, well, our conversion rate is plummeting. It might be more, how does our conversion rate compare to our competitors? And if we're not optimizing that, but our competitors are, do we get left in the dust? Is it just so cost prohibitive now to run digital advertising, right? Is our ROAS just so much lower than that of our competitors that we're just going to get beaten out of this market, right? And so it's this funny thing, like you're striving to get product market fit, and then you get it, and then you're like, oh, wow, now I have to worry about competition. So unfortunately, these metrics, those 4 KPIs I mentioned, they're not in a vacuum, right? And if you're just looking at your trends over time, but not considering how your competitors are trending in those 4 KPIs over time, you might want to look at that, because there's probably a potential to improve and an opportunity to improve and stay competitive there. So yeah, I would start with that.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how this could be really stressful for a head of e-commerce or a chief digital officer, because there are so many variables, right? We're just looking at, the website experience and load times, but I mean, there's variables that are somewhat out of their control, right? Like internet speed. Like my internet speed is different than your internet speed, and we both go to the same website. I might leave because it's too slow, but it's not their fault; it's my fault. Like, how does an e-commerce manager think through those challenges, or do they just sort of shove them to the side and say, I can't control that, let me focus on what I can control?
Yeah, I mean, look, you have to focus on what you can control, but you also need to build a bit of a culture around it. So, most digital professionals I talk to, they're viewing the website of their brand on their high-powered laptop computer in super fast internet, office environment. But most of the brands we work with, the vast majority of their traffic is mobile, which may or may not be connected to the internet. So you might not think there's a big problem there, but have you really been very empathetic with your customers and your shoppers, and have you really assessed what the experience is actually like? And again, I will reemphasize that your competition is not just your direct competitors in terms of people that sell similar products and are in the same space as you and market to the same niche. It's also TikTok. It's also Instagram, right? It's anything that is there to take the consumer's attention away from your storytelling and from the products that you're displaying. And so, yeah, got news for you. If your website is using technology from a decade or two ago and you're competing with the attention span of Gen Zers who are on TikTok, like, good luck. Yeah, I think that's, you can't always do everything about a bad internet connection and things like that. But in aggregate, if you look at what happens over time, if you start to get these components of your technology right, the data speaks for itself. And so in aggregate, it does work to the marketer's favor when they are invested in the right technology stack for their shoppers.
Is there a correlation between, you talk about old technology, is there a correlation between, if they're on a mobile device, 3G, 4G, 5G, like as the mobile speeds have gotten faster and more e-commerce has migrated to the mobile device, how does that change the e-commerce platform that brands need to be on? Does it change that, or do those e-com platforms evolve with the speed of the internet or the phone service?
Yeah. Look, I think every good technology provider should be updating their product over time. I know there are some platforms out there that's not necessarily the case right now, but I think the better ones are. I think what Headless and composable represents, and why there's so much buzz around it, is that it's a legitimate paradigm shift, right? So it's a legitimate, maybe order of magnitude better than what the other stuff was built on. So that's a factor. But yeah, I always like to make this analogy that I think you alluded to here, Sean, which is, when you buy like a new computer, and like for whatever reason in about 2 or 3 years you thought you bought the best, but like in 2 years it's slow again. Why is that? Well, it turns out that the applications that you're running are aware that computers are getting better and faster, and so they're able to build better things, better customer experiences, because they know that they can tap into more firepower. Well, the same is true with the internet, right? Like, for example, I think it's very important to have, great analytics, and, every third party sort of application that you're running is sort of like when you're using your computer, opening another application or having so many tabs open. Like, it just drains your computer's resources, right? And so if you could figure out a way to, package those applications in a way that doesn't drain excessive resources because they're using newer, more efficient technology, then you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have all these third-party scripts running and all these third-party applications installed, and also have a great shopping experience for your customer.
Okay, so that's a good segue. Let's go back to the definitions, right? So forget about like written definitions. what does headless mean? And at a high level, my understanding is that you've got your the front end, the pretty pictures of the items that I'm looking at, separate from sort of the transactional piece. Um, what am I missing here? Like how is it structured, and maybe paint a picture in layman's terms?
I think that is the definition that folks use, but I think what that's missing is like, who cares? Like, why is that important, right? And I think the reason why that's important is if you have an understanding that there has been this paradigm shift with how websites are made today versus even 5 years ago, then you'll start to understand why that's important, because you can keep your back-end operations but still be able to deliver this customer shopping experience that is competitive with everything else taking up the consumer's attention span, right? So that's why this decoupling, or whatever word we want to use, is valuable. It's because you're able to say, okay, look, I don't want to change out all my operations on the back end, but I want to be able to use new technology that's going to present our brand and our storytelling in the best light possible. That's why separating those things are actually valuable to today's digital marketer.
Okay. And in terms of site speed, right? Having worked in ad tech for so many years, it's easy to integrate. Just drop out our JavaScript on your website.
Right,
And then the next question is, how is this going to affect my site speed? And the answer is always like, it's not. It's asynchronous. It's 200 milliseconds, or whatever the answer is. How do you know? Like, what does that even mean? Like, how important is 200 milliseconds? How do you decide if you're e-commerce or even a marketer and you're talking to a vendor and they're like, no, it loads this fast? How do you know what's too slow?
Oh, okay.
And sorry, I'll not throw one more factor into that. Is it in aggregate? In other words, yes, you have one vendor that's 200 milliseconds, but then they don't know how many other vendors you have on the website.
It is an aggregate. It is an aggregate. So yeah, all of a sudden you have 30 JavaScript things loaded in, which is not uncommon, and you're blowing through some numbers. But actually, there's a subtle nuance here that most of the world doesn't understand, but it's critically important to the success of your digital brand online. There is a massive difference between initial page load speed and then subsequent page-to-page load speeds. Okay, so if we go back to like the business value associated with KPIs, bounce rate is most affected by your initial page load speed. Conversion rate and AOV are most affected by your subsequent page-to-page load speed. So what does that mean? What this means is, for bounce rate, it doesn't, like, if you get your initial page load speed to, it's somewhere in between 3 to 3.5 seconds, like, you're fine. Okay. And if you get from 3.5 to like 2.5, like the marginal incremental difference is not going to affect your bounce rate so significantly. However, the opposite is true when you're thinking about page-to-page load speed, because conversion rate, every time you could bring down the page-to-page load speed, you will see a boost in conversion rate. It doesn't work in this threshold manner the way that that bounce rate does. So first and foremost, just understand, I don't think when we say page load speed, we're actually doing the industry a favor, because they're just breaking open Lighthouse and they're like, oh, I'm at 3 seconds, who cares? It's not important. Yeah. Well, you're actually missing the point. And so, most of our merchants, they're actually able to leverage this technology, and they're able to get page to page load speed as close to zero as one possibly could. So the initial page load speed becomes simply an exercise of, okay, what are the third-party apps we absolutely need, and when are we going to hit that threshold? By the way, that threshold's a little different for every brand, so that is a thing to consider. If you're a more well-known brand, consumers might have more tolerance before they start dropping for page load speed, but you have to kind of find that number and then just do everything you can to stay below the threshold, and you're fine, right? What Headless does is it in a normal world, you kind of click on you load that first page, you click on a link, and then it kind of reloads, right? It does the whole, like, everything reloads. Like, in the headless world, there's no reloading if it's done well, right? So not to get into too much detail here, but some headless solutions ignore that fact, which is a bit of an eye roll, because I think they miss the point of what's driving value for headless. But yeah, most good headless solutions, they'll say, okay, well, guess what? Now after the first page load, we never have to load again, and you're just going to click, and the consumer's going to click, and it's just going to fly through, and it's going to be this very sort of flow-inducing, intuitive experience for the shopper. And so that's why conversion rate is able to ramp so much, right? But that is totally different than if you run like a Lighthouse score, or if you're adding, JavaScript snippets that, are associated with third parties. And yeah, it's, if you start to separate in your mind, okay, if we're going after improving bounce rate, then we have to look at the JavaScript that's being loaded versus, hey, if we're really going after conversion rate, then we have to look at the subsequent page-to-page load speeds. That is like, you're already bringing a 10x improvement to your organization if that concept is just understood within the walls of your brand.
So my advice to all those ad tech companies is never say something to the effect of, it's only 200 milliseconds, it's not going to affect your page, unless they have knowledge of what else they have on their page.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the idea that you're loading in 30, 40, 50, 200 millisecond round trips is a little unempathetic, if you will, to the brand, right? So vendors shouldn't say that. They would need more context. And really, if that question comes up, a really great vendor should say, okay, well, where are your bounce rates now? And what is your initial page load speed? And what's your threshold for adding another 200 milliseconds? If you're still under the threshold and you're happy with your bounce rate, then it really shouldn't be something that's diminishing value.
So that's an interesting choice of words there, happy with your bounce rate. Because I think about this when I hear from vendors that say, we reduce bounce rate, or we're going to increase conversion rate. And I see articles like 97% of people leave a website without buying, and everyone's trying to improve these numbers, but to what end, right? Like, what is the ultimate goal? Yeah, we're not going to get 100% conversion. Is it reasonable to say your bounce rate should be 25%? I go to a similar web and I see the average I see, at least the ones I look at, are like in the high 40s to 50% bounce rates. So what is good? How do we know what's good?
Yeah. So first of all, I think different industries on the web categorize bounce rate in different ways. I was talking to someone who was an SEO expert for a healthcare company, and he was saying that their bounce rate is high, but that's expected. They're doing they're doing searches on a specific ailment or something like this, and it's the whole purpose is just to read one page and create brand awareness. So if you have a high bounce rate there, it's just the wrong metric to consider for that particular strategy. So in general, though, when it comes to e-commerce, bounce rate is painful because it's the cost, especially if you spent money on a specific channel and you have a high bounce rate for that specific channel. It's like torching cash, right? Mm-hmm. So ideally you want to get that low. Now, to make things even more complex, remember I mentioned that headless technology opens up this idea where it's instant page load speed after. Well, guess what? Google might look at that as bounce, even though they went through 4 or 5 different pages. It's really only one page. So I think the way to think about this is how much traffic from a specific channel is actually coming in and continuing to engage with the brand. And definitely do it by channel, because every channel is going to be really different. And just make sure that you're comfortable with the way your ad spend is versus how much you're torching on bounce rate. And as long as that metric is okay for you, that's why I say it's a threshold, then you're fine. The thing that you're going to get more optimization out of is subsequent page-to-page load speeds.
So I'm going to go back to that because on the SEO or SEM, let's go SEM. If I'm buying search keywords for a brand and I'm looking at bounce rate traditionally, and then my e-commerce team migrated us to a headless solution. Do you think that most SEM experts understand that metric is out the window, and they have to find a different way?
No,
because they keep optimizing. I think it's
like a hidden secret. Yeah,
it tanked, right? Our performance tanked, and it wasn't that. It's actually better.
Yeah.
I
think this whole subject is painfully misunderstood, and it's to the detriment of digital marketers today. I think first of all, if their metrics are only looking at that one, bounce rate, that one KPI in isolation, it's just a big mistake. You have to balance that against the other three KPIs that I think are core and essential. But also, like, bounce rate's a bit of a fickle thing. I think in general, if your initial page load is getting around 3 seconds or less, you're in a great spot for almost any other channel. And if you start to creep above 4 or 5 seconds for the initial, it's called first contentful paint. If you want to be really dorky about it, then you're in the danger zone. And again, I'll reiterate. Let's say your number is 3.5 seconds for initial page load speed. That's your threshold. Getting it down to 3 seconds or 2.8, yes, it will help bounce rate, but it won't be the biggest lever you can pull now for the health of the organization and your overall ROAS. Whereas conversion rate, every incremental page-to-page load speed gain you make, you'll see it directly in conversion rate. So just understand, one is staggered and the other is more smooth, or maybe even logarithmic, actually.
Okay, so I want to go back to the concept of you have one page load, and then you basically have no other page loads because the elements are just sort of feeding into the browser. Can you just explain that a little bit more? So, like, I go to a Headless website, the page loads, the homepage loads, and then all of these things are sort of floating around in the background. How is it, like, where are they living? Are they being downloaded while I'm on the homepage? Like, explain to me how it actually functions.
You know what? So yes, there are different techniques for doing this, and this is why I think headless solutions vary in quality, right? Because there's many different ways to kind of think about how should we load things quickly. And what you just described is something called prefetching, which is a good technique that can be used. Another way of thinking about this is, if you think about your e-commerce store, like, what percent of the things on the screen actually need to change when you click from, say, a product listing page to a product detail page, right? And what you'll realize is the vast majority of the assets don't actually need to change. So, like, why would you reload them? You're just burning resources for no purpose, right? So one of the things that good headless solutions take advantage of is the understanding that they just have to consider the delta between the page you're on and the page you're about to click on. And so if you can start to make assumptions around that, you can get very, very close to near instant page load speed, because you're being so much more efficient with the resources that your mobile phone needs to load.
It's a great way to put it. So how do I think about, you mentioned Optimizely before, and you have sounds like several people from there working with you. How does those types of solutions where you're optimizing that on-page experience, how do you do that for a headless experience where you're not changing so many things on the page load?
Yeah, and again, I think I don't know if that was personalization or A/B testing.
I mean, oftentimes they go together. I mean, we hear a lot about you should do personalization, but test it.
yeah, of course. We have a really unique way of doing personalization where it doesn't work by doing like this sleight of hands quick switch. It's already like preloaded. So the other thing that I think marketers should be aware of is there's something called edge computing, which it's actually one of the few technical words that makes a ton of sense. So if you think about, like the Amazon cloud or the Google cloud, where probably your website's being hosted from, like, these centers are generally like kind of far away from where your consumers are actually consuming your content on their phone. And so if you could push that information closer to the edge, meaning closer to the actual physical location of where they're downloading this information, you have great page load speed wins. Okay. So one of the advents and one of the things that Headless is able to capture really, really well, there's other ways to do it too, but Headless does this really, really, really well, is they're leveraging edge compute and edge processes to actually serve up the website content. And so at some point you're butting up against the speed of light, right? Which is the most ideal way actually to serve these things. It's like if your bottleneck is, well, like it's literally the speed of light is like our biggest issue, then you're probably doing just fine. But yeah, in general, by moving the information closer to the consumer, so on the edge, you're able to get these great gains. And what that means is if both versions of the website, test A and test B, oversimplified, test A and test B, they both live on the edge, then you're not going to see as much drag as you would if they had to go back to what we call an origin server.
And if they don't, or if one does and one doesn't, then that could be the issue, not necessarily the experience.
Totally.
And just to dig into that, the edge means if I'm sitting in outside of Portland, and Portland is the closest cloud-based server with AWS that the retailer is working with, they'll push that next level content to that server versus if you're sitting in New York, you might push it to a different server because of where you're sitting. And that way, when I call for it, it comes faster.
Yes. And this is also why Headless is a great solution for internationalization. So I want to be clear, there are other ways of using edge caching and edge compute. Headless is not the only way, but it makes it more dynamic. Okay. And so you can load full experiences through the edge. And this is also really important if you're a brand that has initiatives around internationalization. Imagine being in Sydney, but your origin server is in New York, right? Like you kind of have to travel quite some distance around the world in order to deliver that data. But if you actually have edge processes happening right in Australia, then you don't have to go all the way back to New York to start to pull things. And by the way, it's not just like one pull, it's like this back and forth communication. So yeah, it turns out the planet Earth is large, and even though the speed of light is fast, transferring a lot of that information across the wire has a lot of lag time.
Yeah, the edge computing. I love the term, and you're right. It is one of those terms that's easier. It makes sense.
It's not Headless. They did a better job with that one.
Right, it makes sense. But I think about, like, I've worked for tech companies that, and I've heard this too from other tech companies, they literally open up their data centers as close to Google as possible, Google offices around the world. I mean, they're trying to game it, right? They're thinking that they're closer to the server, then the content gets out faster. I mean, this probably predates the way you're using it, but it's the similar concept, right?
It is. It turns out like the physical distance from wherever you're serving up your web experience, whether that's a mobile app or a website or what have you, that it is a factor. I think the flaw with some of that thinking is, well, because there's edge servers all over the world now that the big cloud providers like Amazon, Google provide, your physical proximity to Google directly is probably just not the most important thing.
Now you can just push the content. That makes total sense. So when you think about, for the listeners, but I imagine this is the way you and your sales team think. Like, who's your ideal customer today? Is it the established brand that's on a legacy e-commerce platform, and that they need to be thinking about migration because they need to be getting faster? Or is it the startup that's like, okay, we're about to build this business, and we want to make sure we build it with the best technology? Who should be thinking about Headless more? Or is it the same?
So I think Headless is not a tool you want to use until you're confident you have product market fit. And I use that as a general kind of blanket term, but I think maybe another way to think about it is, the product resonates with your customers and the target market that you've chosen. You also know that particular channels will provide some sort of positive ROI for you. So particular marketing channels, you kind of have that together, right? And that's been established. The problem is, and I think this is where another area where Headless gets a bit of a bad rap. If you do it prematurely, before you have product market fit, you want to quickly move through the cycles until you get product market fit. So, okay, we're going to try this thing. Okay, that didn't work. We're going to try this other thing. You want to move as fast as possible for different iterations of your business. And the faster you get to the answer of product market fit, the better. If you try to bring in headless commerce into that process, it actually will slow you down. Okay, because it is more. There is a more of a technical hurdle, right? So you don't want to get like stuck with that. Now, once you have product market fit, that's when it makes sense to start to optimize. And also, another way of thinking about this, like less engineering centric, more from a business point of view, what's going to add more value to the business pre product market fit? Well, how fast can you get to product market fit, right? And that's what's going to add the most value. So the strategies that let you do that. And so like, something like leveraging the Shopify Liquid template with a pre-made theme, and the App Store is going to be your best bet, probably, or something equivalent. Once you have found that product market fit, then the question becomes, okay, now how do we add business value now that we have established this product market fit? And that almost every time is going to be, right, how do we optimize our 4 key KPI metrics around bounce rate, conversion rate, AOV, and customer lifetime value? And so when you start to shift into that mode of optimization, that is when it's the right time to pick up Headless. People try to ask, like, what's the GMV number for that? And, like, how can I tell? I don't know. You tell me, right? Like, do you feel like you have product market fit? Is it time to optimize? Or do you need to continue more on the experimentation route as opposed to the optimization route for the foreseeable future? And if the answer is the latter, then there's no harm in holding off and waiting a little bit. But yeah, if the answer is, hey, we're in this competitive industry, we have this market opportunity, we know X, Y, and Z works in terms of marketing channels, then I think it's probably time to start to maximize, your advertising dollar, and this is a great way to do that.
So if a brand is on Shopify, or they're on Salesforce Commerce Cloud, or some other e-com platform today, and they meet those requirements, they hit those thresholds, and now they're in the optimization phase, how does that migration, is it something where the Headless solution sits on top of their existing, like what are they changing with their existing e-com platform, as they're adding on a Headless solution?
So this is a little unique to Nacell, but we're able to pair as a starting point with the commerce solution you have today. And that's because one of the ethos at our company is we're anti rip and replace. We think, every e-commerce professional that I speak to, to change platforms is like at minimum a 2 to 3 year endeavor. It's always like, 10 times more expensive than they ever thought it would be. And so at Nacell, we try to work with the technology you have as a starting point, and then what are the things we can do to maximize business value to make the ROI positive within months instead of years. Okay, so that's just our ethos. That's how our system happens to work. That's not how some of our competitors work. That said, most of the merchants we work with today, they will be on one of those platforms, and their goal is to move off over time.
Okay. Can you give us an example of a brand that most people will know? Take us through the scenario when they came to you, what they were on, what they were looking to achieve, and how you measured success for them.
I think one of my most favorite brands that I think we're really proud of at Nacell is Ball and Branch. Now, to be fair, I think this is, when I think about digitally native brands, Ball and Branch is one of the first ones that always pop to mind. They did this incredible job of really building a brand, meaning they weren't just going out and using the hottest growth hack to build some sort of revenue at the cost of, cash flows and EBITDA, right? They've really said, hey, we are here to build a long-term sustainable brand. We believe in the ethos of our company around sustainability. We love our products. We think they're great. And our customers really resonate with them. They found what I'll call, some good unique channels to reach their customers. So it wasn't just your typical, meta advertising. I think they did a really good job kind of crafting the brand. They realized that, they were definitely leaving some money on the table with the page load speeds the way that they were with Shopify out of the box. And their other problem was they realized that they had this unique digital story to tell to the world. And it was difficult for them to craft those storytelling sort of experiences that would resonate with their consumers without sacrificing conversion rate, right? And so I think what they did is really, really smart. In fact, it's probably fair to say they wrote the playbook on this, but how can a brand that is, starting to get established, but really making waves with their early, customers, how can they get the storytelling around what makes their brand unique and differentiated without sacrificing product conversion rate and customer lifetime value? And like, they did this very well, and we were able to, be a very small part of their story where, our platform helped them deliver, significantly faster page load speeds, which boosted conversion rates, but also gave them a platform where it was very easy for them to portray their brand, voice, and to show even first-time visitors pretty quickly why they're different than some of their competitors. They're in a relatively competitive space, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that they were able to do that, I think, is no small feat.
Yeah, that's a good one. So how does somebody get started? And I think that I'm gonna put a little spin on this question, not just in terms of like the technical steps, but does it typically start with engineering saying we need to go headless, or is it marketing saying we can't get more optimization? It's the website. We need to improve that. Like, what is the typical conversation? How does that conversation go? And then how do you determine that you can help them?
Well, look, I think almost every engineer is really excited to use new technology and some of these new tools. So, in general, I think engineers are friendly to the idea. However, it should be a marketing initiative. It should be a digital initiative. And that's because it is the business unit that should be deciding, okay, it's time for us now to optimize, and what are the things we can do to maximize our advertising dollar. Anytime headless is proposed in a vacuum, meaning without KPIs that folks are going after, and you're a part of the organization, you should be deeply suspicious of that, right? You don't want this to become a science project. You want this to be something that's going to drive business results and revenues and EBITDA. And if you're not thinking, okay, here are the core KPIs, here's where we're at today, here's the thresholds that we want to start to unlock, and we're going to kind of piecemeal do this. And if things are moving in the right direction, we'll continue to double down in that direction. That is something that business units are uniquely good at understanding, and they should be the ones really, in my opinion, presenting that to the organization. And then that should be in partnership with engineering, where engineering should be the ones vetting the technology, understanding, hey, here are our KPIs, here's why these numbers are important, and here's the technology that's going to get us as close as possible to maximizing those goals.
Okay. So you sort of hit on some of the mistakes people make there. Are there others, like the mistake being like, have your KPIs, don't go into it as a science project? Are there any other, pitfalls that you've seen from brands that they're just not, they don't go about it the right way? So because they don't know, right? It's something new. It's not they're not smart. They just, help them out. Like, what do they need to think about?
Well, look, I'm a pretty big first principles advocate and thinker, and so there's so much misinformation around companies that are saying that they're headless now, and it's really a shame, because I think it's really hurt a lot of the good players in the industry overall. I would, when you are talking to a vendor, whether it's your current e-commerce platform or some sort of new maybe solution like a headless solution, I would say very specifically, our focus is to decrease bounce rate and increase conversion rate. Show me exactly how this technology is going to help me do that, and give me the reasons why, and see what they have to say, and then vet that with your engineering team. And if all three of you agree that that makes sense, then great, right? But if the vendor is saying, well, it's headless, whatever, everyone likes that, and they're not able to prove to you that they can decrease significantly page load speed, to get a better bounce rate for that initial page load, or they're not able to show you how the page-to-page load speed increased significantly, and they have 3 or 4 case studies with customers that have seen conversion rate improvement from that, then I think it's very fair to be deeply skeptical of those.
Are there other ways, like how does a vendor demonstrate that before they actually do the integrations? Just simply case studies, or are there things that you can do to show the brand, this is what we're going to do, and here, I'll prove it to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so first of all, I do, yes, but my fundamental belief is like, you kind of either believe that this is true or you don't, right? Like, if you don't think page load speed is important, no matter what, and you look at the data and you still aren't a believer, then there's no amount of work a good vendor will be able to do to prove you otherwise. So I think you have to have a fundamental understanding across the organization, and maybe with your SI, if you use one or something like that, that, yeah, this is theory that makes sense, and we're here to deliver a brand to the goldfish brain consumer, and so that's why this works. If there's like a misunderstanding around what page load speed is and why, some of these nuances that we just discussed, Sean, if that's not understood within the organization, don't bother. It's you're fighting an uphill battle, and there's no amount of work that a headless project will be able to do that you're going to get satisfaction from across the organization.
Yeah, I like that. Makes sense. I feel like we could keep talking about this and I could keep pushing you and pulling the things back. I'm sure there's a lot more education to be had, but I think we're out of time for today. I really appreciate having you in the Matrix, and I hope we can get you back with Ball and Branch or with another brand to really. I want to hear from them. Like, how did they know that this was the right thing to do for them, and how do they measure that success, and what was the impact that they could measure? I think just hearing it from a brand is going to be really powerful. So we'll get that going, and till then, take care.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sean. Let's do it.
My pleasure. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
This episode of the MarTech Matrix was brought to you by the Cogent Collective, a community of marketing and e-commerce leaders. Learn more at cogentcollective.com. For show notes and information on upcoming episodes, head on over to themartechmatrix.com. If you would like to learn more about the companies appearing on this podcast and see if they're a good fit for your company, send Sean a note at sean@cogentcollective.com. New episodes of the MarTech Matrix podcast will drop every Monday, so be sure to subscribe with your favorite podcast network so you can stay on top of what's happening in the Matrix.